During the mid-1980s, Sega was going through a period of transition. Their catalog of titles drew crowds and generated solid revenue for arcade operators, but the success of products like the Nintendo Entertainment System made it clear video games' future laid on consoles. The company was well known for their cutting-edge technology and the varied output they built with it. But what did it look like when they had to cut it down to size and bring it all home? While Japanese developer and publisher Sega had been putting out parlor games as far back as the 1960s, by 1985 they had built a burgeoning arcade division. Famous for their technological innovations, that year saw the release of the earliest versions of their impressive Superscaler and System 16 arcade boards. The Superscaler allowed for sprites to be rapidly resized to give the illusion of depth as they moved toward or away from the screen, providing impressive visuals to go along with Sega's brand of quarter-munching action. System 16 boards were a tremendous upgrade over the company's earlier hardware, featuring smoother scrolling, larger sprites, and an expansive color palette. It was the backbone of several of the company's mainstays during the period, including platformers like Wonder Boy 3, the acrobatic ninja action of Shinobi, overhead running gunner and borderline copyright-infringing Alien Syndrome, and fantasy-themed beat-em-up Altered Beast. Each offered unique and satisfying mechanics to bring in players, making the units a necessity for most arcades. But before those could take off, one of the first games to launch was a vibrant, eye-catching horizontal shooter. Released in early 1986, Fantasy Zone quickly became the highest-earning Sega arcade game for several months in a row, solidifying the System 16 as a promising platform. By the time of its release, shooters already had a long and storied history, with an early highlight coming in the form of 1978's Taito-produced Space Invaders. Once the formula proved lucrative, almost every single company would make their own attempt at copying it. Some were built with the sole intention of leeching money away from Taito, while others were set on putting their own spin on the genre. A handful of particular games caught the attention of designer Yoji Ishii, and, when given the task of developing a shooter from his bosses at Sega, he would use them as inspiration to craft the title. Once given his directive, Ishii mulled over his options and ended up making a few choices that would separate the game from its main competition. He had just come off of development for the 1984 title Flicky, created with the intent of taking on the Namco-produced Mappy from 1983. Flicky differentiated itself by implementing free scrolling. Rather than having players find stages' endpoints, the levels would instead loop and start over, making them feel larger and allowing for continuous movement. Ishii was also a fan of Atari's 1981 shooter Defender, another game that had used that type of scrolling to great effect. He enjoyed the feature and thought it would help this new shooter stand out from the crowd. He also wanted to incorporate a power-up system, but applied a few changes to have it make more sense to him. In a 2014 interview with Shooting Gameside magazine, Ishii stated, "Something felt unnatural to me about powering up just by touching a power-up. I thought it made more sense to have power-ups be like taking your car into an auto shop for a tune-up and equipping it with new parts. Cars are one of my hobbies. I like cars and motorcycles, actually. I like the idea of buying new parts and gradually improving your vehicle. And to buy parts, you need money. For those reasons, I added the shop." As enemies were destroyed, they would drop coins that could be gathered up and spent on upgrades. Shops would periodically appear, and as players spent money on add-ons for their ship, prices would increase in order to keep the game from getting out of balance. Arcades were meant to generate revenue above all else, so allowing players to become too powerful would cut off the game's ability to siphon money out of a patron's pocket. The game's main objective is to find and destroy several enemy bases scattered throughout each stage. Ishii believed this applied the same driving force to players as the dots in Pac-Man, giving them something to collect as they made their way through the level. Gamers would fight waves of adversaries while traveling from base to base before facing off with a massive boss. The title was relentlessly difficult, challenging the players to take on a never-ending swarm of enemies while navigating fields of bullets. Despite that, the upgrade system and base destroying was just as addictive to consumers as Ishii had hoped. His decision to keep the game out of a space setting and create a lighter tone also helped draw in a wider audience. In that same 2014 interview, he reflected on what led to the game's final look. "In the beginning, my boss told me to make a space-themed shooting game to rival Gradius. All the backgrounds were supposed to be in outer space with star fields, but I doubted whether players would be interested in a mere knockoff. And personally, as a creator, I wanted to make something more colorful and showy, so I told our designers to use pastel colors for a bright, cheerful presentation. Fantasy Zone helped legitimize the System 16's more powerful hardware, but the game still had to be designed around its limitations. In a 2002 interview, Ishii discussed some of the hurdles the team faced. Our hardware limited us to displaying 62 sprites at the same time, but our programmers performed an incredible feat figuring out how to make those big bosses move and finding a workaround to have up to 200 items on screen, including bullets. Their efforts made Fantasy Zone into the game it is. From there, the System 16 would help in the creation of hit after hit for Sega, but a shift in the industry's landscape was already starting. Years before, Atari had shown with a 1977 video computer system that there was an appetite for home consoles with interchangeable cartridges. While the bottom fell out of the industry in the early 1980s in North America, that market crash was largely invisible to the rest of the world. The family computer came to store shelves in Japan in 1983 and was massively successful. The console was reconfigured and carefully launched in the United States in 1985 as the Nintendo Entertainment System, finding equal success in the Western territory. Sega had also brought a console to market, but not nearly to the same effect. Their SG-1000 launched on the same day as the Famicom in 1983, but compared to Nintendo's gaming device, it was extremely underpowered and could barely offer even vague approximations of the company's own arcade output. It only released in select territories and had little impact in Japan. They quickly went back to the drawing board and ultimately came up with the Mark III, later renamed the Master System. The system made its way to store shelves in late 1985, but once again failed to compete with Nintendo's monstrously in-demand platform. Even with the Master System featuring more robust hardware, third-party developers flocked to Nintendo and bolstered their lineup of games to a degree Sega simply could not keep up with. The company was largely on their own to get products on the shelf, leaving their designers and programmers little time to flesh out titles in the way Nintendo was able to. That didn't stop them from trying to drum up enthusiasm for the console by bringing versions of their biggest arcade hits home. Quality was inconsistent. Games like Hang On came surprisingly close to their more advanced counterparts despite the more limited technology. Others, like Enduro Racer, had to make so many compromises that they were completely different games. Fantasy Zone would come to the system in 1986, falling closer to the former. Released only a few short months after the arcade title, the Master System couldn't match the more advanced version's visual variety, but maintained similar enough style and gameplay to give those at home their horizontal shooting fix. Yoji Ishii wasn't part of the team that ported the game over, but he did meet with them and shared a bit of advice. At that time, I wasn't working in the console department, but I did meet and talk with them, and yeah, it looked really difficult. They would ask me things like, "We can't do this boss on the hardware, would one like this be okay instead?" I believe I told them they should do whatever they wanted. I also saw a lot of determination to make something that surpassed the original. Whatever constraints Ishii's programmers faced with the System 16 hardware paled in comparison to what director Mutsuhiro Fuji dealt with getting the game to run on the Master System. The title had to be compressed down to fit on a cartridge that offered only an astonishing 128 kilobytes of space. Compromises had to be made, including swapping out two bosses that were too difficult to get working in the limited development time available. They instead had replacements that were thematically similar but far more appropriate for the home release. Backgrounds for boss areas also had to go, with more dynamic fights taking precedent over grander visuals. In a 2002 interview, Fuji stated, "I knew we had to choose between having animated backgrounds or bosses that could move. I'd of course have preferred to do a direct port of the arcade version, but given the deadline we had and the hardware limitations, I could see that some things were off the table. We knew how much memory we had available for sprites too, so it was likely the case, actually it was definitely the case, that if we displayed the full backgrounds, we couldn't display the bosses." Even with so many obstacles, the scaled-down release received a positive reception and managed to capture a large part of what made the arcade game so memorable. Colors are bright, bosses are large and imposing, and the constant stream of enemies and bullets is just as crushingly difficult. Gamers wouldn't get close to arcade-accurate titles until the next generation of gaming devices released years later, so it was simply a given during the 8-bit era that any ported title would either be heavily condensed or radically changed. Having access to something on the level of an arcade game simply wasn't feasible, short of spending an exorbitant amount of money to purchase an actual unit. Over time, however, what would have been a player's nearly impossible dream became exceedingly common. More powerful hardware was built, and the burden of running the more demanding or obscure games of the past almost disappeared. Collections packed with titles came into existence, showcasing near-perfect recreations. As technology improved and arcades fell out of favor, it was inevitable that video gaming would end up coming home. The Master System didn't reach the heights of the Nintendo Entertainment System, but it was a necessary step towards survival. Sega would still go on to find success with their subsequent consoles, and then later on as a third-party developer. They'd frequently celebrate their earlier games, putting together compilations and honoring their creations with homages or by including them in contemporary titles. Eventually, they'd release the Like a Dragon series, which would grow into one of the most notable franchises in the entire industry. All of the entries, including spin-offs like Lost Judgment, would become known for being packed with things to do. Arcades were regularly featured, filled with classic games and fully modeled cabinets to further add authenticity. Several titles that had seen plenty of re-releases showed up, but as the series progressed, the inclusions would get more elaborate and esoteric. Lost Judgment would take it a step further, featuring a playable recreation of the Master System in the main character's office. 8 unlockable titles were available initially, with 4 more added through a downloadable content pack. One of the games happened to be the home port of Fantasy Zone. The arcade just down the street from his office also includes the original, and with this, Lost Judgment featured something that previous Sega compilations never could. By including the arcade and Master System releases of the game, Lost Judgment allows players to forget about any disappointment someone in 1986 would have had over getting the scaled-back version at home. The two can stand side by side and give a clear understanding that one version is not less or more than. Both had creators that worked through obstacles and limitations to bring them to fruition, and both are impressive in their own ways. More than that, Lost Judgment provides something that a list of games on a disc can't. Players can walk downtown and head into an arcade to experience the eerie nighttime silence mixed in with the muted blips and bloops of a row of games. They can see how far they can get on one credit, or spend as much time as they want pushing for a new high score. They can try out a brand new game they never saw at their local arcade, or they can go back to an old favorite to take yet another run. And after they're done, they can head home to bathe in the warm glow of a CRT while they pick a game off the shelf to play something entirely different. The arcade heyday may be over, and it'll never be the 80s again, but for at least a little bit, they can live the fantasy.